So welcome everybody. Welcome to our Governance Made Easy webinar today, titled Helping Directors to Be More Strategic, with our special guests, Stephen Bowman, Steve McCrone, and Georgia Henry. My name's Sean McDonald, and I'll be your moderator for the next 40 odd minutes. And firstly, thank you for attending today. We always appreciate the effort you make to be here for our live events. During the session, if you have any questions, which we hope you will do, for our panel members, please use the Q&A button on your toolbar. We'll be answering as many of these as we have time for. So feel free to use the chat as well if you prefer the chat option. Finally, if you stay through till the end, which we hope you will do, and as is customary for our webinars, we have a special treat. By answering our really short 1-minute survey at the end of the webinar, you'll go into the draw to win our beautiful gift hamper worth over $400. Now, for those who are not too familiar with BoardPro, we're a board software provider that serve just around about 25,000 users around the world. And we enable organizations to prepare for and run their board meetings more effectively and efficiently with, you guessed it, clever software, with less time, and deliver more impact and value for the organization. And as much as we are a board software provider, or sometimes called a board portal, part of our wider mission is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organizations, especially those with resource constraints. Now, I normally introduce my panel, but today I'm going to have my team introduce themselves, starting with Stephen Bowman. Over to you, sir.
Why, thank you, and hi everyone. Welcome along to today. Steve Bowman. I'm from Conscious Governance. I've been working in the sector of boards and senior executive teams for about 40 years. The stories I could tell, and probably tell a few of them as we go along today. So I look forward to sharing with you some of the insights and some of the best practices that chairs and CEOs of other organisations like yours have shared with me. It's a bit of the pay it forward philosophy. I look forward to it.
Thanks, Stephen. Steve, over to you.
Kia ora koutou, Stephen McCrone. I'm the Managing Director of AGLX Asia Pacific. We specialise in strategy, risk and innovation. My particular interaction with boards mainly concerns what I call adaptive strategy, and I think you could really typify our professional work as helping boards be more strategic.
Thanks, Steve. Georgia, finally to yourself.
Thanks, Sean. My company is Henry Reid, and I've been working with boards probably for close to 10 years now, particularly in culture and leadership, also in strategy facilitation. So working with boards around behaviours, culture, how to get the best from an organisation, looking at organisational effectiveness. So like Steve Bowman, I've probably got a lot of stories of things that I've seen boards do really well, and also the issues that really limit that strategic effectiveness at the board level. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Georgia. So for the next 40 odd minutes, listen and add to the discussion, please, by asking as many questions as you would like. You don't have to worry about taking notes on the slides. A full recording of the webinar along with the slide deck, the white paper, and a very special resource that we have for you will be available after the session today. So without further ado, let me hand over to Stephen to get us started.
Thanks very much, Sean. Look, this is a great topic because one of the things that we find is that when you ask a board, and we do many board reviews, and one of the most common comments that directors say is, "Oh, I wish we were more strategic." And then you delve into that and you ask them, what do you mean by being more strategic? Well, being more strategic, less in the weeds. So what we want to do today is just to unpack some of the techniques, the tools, the behaviours, the mindsets, and actually help not only the board, but the individual directors to actually be this thing that we're calling strategic. And to kick that whole thing off, I've found over the decades, one of the best ways to get people to recognise that they're not there to have a meeting. They're not there to prove how busy the staff are. They're not there to read reports. They're there for one reason and one reason only as a board, and that is to make the choices that create the future for the communities that we serve. Our job as a board is to make choices, not decisions. So really what we want to do is make sure that we're being provided with options, strategically feasible options. Do we get larger? Do we start to fine tune down a little bit? Do we do it with other people? Do we do it by ourselves? What are the strategically feasible options that we've got? Don't tell me there's only one way of doing something. So making the choices that create the future, always looking at creating the future. One of the things that we often find is that the way the board meetings are structured, it's structured around all the operational things. It's structured around, look how busy we are. Look at all the activities that we're doing. And there's no actual conversation about, well, what is this future likely to be in 5 years or 10 years? And what do we need to start thinking about now so that no matter what we do, we're going to be in good shape? And this is where we start to simplify strategic plans, for example. It's one of the great tools that we've got. But most strategic plans that we see, and I'll be interested in Steve and George's views on this, but most strategic plans we see, and we see thousands of them during the year, most of them are wish lists of a list of activities that we think we want to get done over the next few years, rather than saying, here are the 2 or 3 big fella things that we really need to focus on to get where we need to so that we can actually deliver against our vision. So a strategic plan by rights really should only be 2, maybe 3 key things. You can call them strategies if you like, but these are the 2 or 3 big fella things we've just got to get right the next 2 or 3 years so that no matter what the future throws at us, we're going to be in good shape. Georgia, thoughts?
Yeah, 100% agree. A lot of boards get pulled down into the detail, and when I start to talk about strategic intent, if I'm doing a strategy facilitation, look up what is that future view, what is that long-term view, and what are the 3 key things that are going to get you there. What happens, how you deliver on that, that is the operational plan. That's not the strategic plan. And when you shift the thinking to those few key things and you look at how are we going to know when we achieving those, that becomes the focus then for the board meetings. They're the things that we need to be tracking, not the details of the operations. That's why you have a CEO and an executive team. So shifting that focus to it's not all the things, it's those few big things, can be a real shift when you've got a board that has a lot of people with strong executive experience. It's taking a different view, helping them see that there's a different view to being strategic rather than operational.
They change when they need to change. That's your cue, Steve.
Yeah, my perspective on particularly with boards' engagement with strategy is their main role should be to issue what I would call a very clear sense of direction. And that direction can be clarified through what Clausewitz might call the L-strike tactic, or I think what you've referred to as the 2 or 3 big things. And then the role is, in my mind, to be an enabler for the activity that the executive then undertake to focus on those 2 or 3 big things in order to move the organization in the direction that they've chosen. I think a sign of failure for boards is exactly that, is if a board is making decisions or too many decisions, then that's a sign that they are not really operating at that strategic level. It's the executive who should be making decisions. The board should be setting a clear sense of direction.
So that just gives us a little bit of food for thought in all of that, because and I'm sure many of you have heard all of this before, but then what does that actually mean when it comes down to when we have our board meetings or when we look at the sort of people that are actually going to be able to contribute to this? So one of the things we've got up here is when you're looking at strategy, that one of the great phrases that we love playing with is this thing called strategic awareness. And that is, there's no point in having strategy unless you're willing to be aware of what else is changing out there and being willing to look at things from different points of view. There's no point in having all this awareness if there's not 2 or 3 key things that we really need to focus on. So if you put those things together, then this whole notion of strategic awareness starts with us as an individual. I've seen too many organisations where they have a strat plan, but there's not one person in there who's willing to be strategic, to have that awareness of what are the possibilities. So Here's a couple of pointers for you. First one is the sort of people that we're looking for, particularly around our board table, are those people that have no real fixed points of view. You know who those people are. The people who've got fixed points of view are those who would rather die in the ditches than be proven wrong. They come in with an agenda. These are the most dangerous sort of people coming into your board meeting because they come in thinking they're going to fix the world if only the world is their point of view. So we just need to be aware of that and manage those. The next one there is the willingness to be the question. We want people who are curious. So one of the great criteria when you're looking at nominations for people coming onto your board, and if you're smart enough to do interviews of the people, one of the questions you should ask them is, when was the last time in a board meeting where your curiosity changed the whole tone of that meeting? What may not be a bad question to ask. So we're after people who are willing to be the question, who are willing to be that sense of curiosity. We want people who are willing to receive everything without judging it as right or wrong. We want people willing to receive other people's points of view. The most common complaint that we get from directors about fellow directors is that this person is not willing to listen to other people's points of view. We don't care whether they agree with them, but they're not even willing to listen to them.
Yeah, Steve, I think one of the hardest things here on a lot of boards that I work with is when you have member elected or appointed board directors. So you don't have that opportunity to select those people, and they're coming in almost with a really fixed mandate as I'm representing my group of members. And that can be a really hard mindset to shift. Have you got any tips on that? Because that's a really difficult position.
Two things that make the difference on that one. Steve, I'll bring you back in a sec. Two things that make a big difference on that one is, first of all, an induction program that is not just about here's the things we do, but here's the culture of the board. Here's how we work things. Here's how we use questions. Here's how we do our research in between. And then the second part is an actual buddy system or a mentor system where you have someone who can actually assist that person to get to the space where they're actually being a major contribution rather than a roadblock. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, I guess from our perspective is it's difficult to get people to change their behavior or what you might call mindset without changing the process that's around it. Oftentimes, board processes tend to head towards creating what we call false harmony, so everybody on the same page. And there's a number of processes that boards can go through to really surface what we call creative friction. So you're kind of forcing people to disagree, whether or not they'd naturally disagree or not, that doesn't matter. What we're trying to do is harness multiple perspectives in respect to, say, strategic direction or strategic choices, and that forces the board to actually scan more broadly than they might otherwise do if they're trying to create harmony. So this idea of, one of the things that inhibits that is this idea of we all need to be on the same page. And actually, Georgia, to your point, with member elected boards who often come in with a very tight personal perspective, you can actually harness that in a way that's positive, because oftentimes those tight personal perspectives will force us to think in a way that we wouldn't normally think. But the danger is, of course, they become a dominant voice. So it's about, for me, how do you really get multiple perspectives and really harness that friction, harness that polite disagreement. I think someone in the chat's just called it.
Yeah, exactly. If we look at the points that are on here, is the implications for this are huge in terms of report writing, for example, and papers for discussion or papers for decision for the board. So, for example, no fixed point of view means we need 2 or 3 strategically feasible options. Don't just tell me there's one way of doing it. And they all need to be put through the risk filter, the financial filter. Does it meet our vision filter, whatever it might be? But I want 2 or 3 strategically feasible options. Don't tell me there's only one way. I want to know also what are the questions that we should be asking. So one of the great tips that we find most boards don't do is that when you have a paper coming up for discussion or for decision, there should be a heading in there that says strategic questions for board consideration. And so therefore we can get our directors starting to think about those questions. And even if you don't have one that you want to put in there, if you still keep that heading in there, it reminds the directors that their job is not to talk, their job is to be the question, be that sense of curiosity, and bring their perspective and their life skills to a discussion. So looking at these sort of attributes and then looking at how we structure our board reporting has huge dividends for the board. Sean, next one.
I have a couple of questions, Steve.
Fire away.
From Keith. Is asking, how do you gather a balance of skills on the board?
First thing is figure out what the skills are that you're going to need on the board. So typically a skills matrix. You have Board Pro have some very good webinars and some downloadable resources on skills matrices. If you're not sure what they are, then do a little bit of research on them. But also looking to see not just what are the skills that we want today, what are the skills we're going to need in 4 or 5 years? And let's start putting them onto the board now. So, for example, I'd be really wanting, particularly in a lot of the spaces that we work in, I really want someone on there who's starting to understand artificial intelligence. Not for them to do it for us, but to get us to understand that this is a game changer that most of us don't even understand why it's a game changer. So having a look at sort of the skills and the experience that would address some of our big major key risks or big major key strategic focuses over the next few years, starting to look at who the people are out there. Now, they may be amongst your members if you're a member organisation, but every board really should have 1 or 2 positions that are skills-based that the board can appoint to fill in some of those areas. Whole different discussion. Yeah. Steve, Georgia?
I'd jump in and say, when we're looking at how do you know the skills, the experience part is really, really important. Looking at what lived experience do the board members have to give you the diversity that's required for your organisation. So it's diversity is not about a tick the box exercise. It is what are the lived experience that are actually going to help us make better strategic decisions by having people with that experience on our board. So, an example, if you are a disability organisation, do you have someone with lived experience of disability on your board? So it's really about what are the lived experiences that we also need to have represented to give real perspective and understanding for strategic decision making.
Steve.
Couple of other questions.
Yeah, I'm sort of wondering if I should. I agree with what you're saying. I think there is a danger in this idea, and it's come up a couple of times, in saying, what's the future going to be like in 5 to 10 years? I think there's enough what we call irreducibility in the strategic environment that the answer to that question is, I don't know. And if you don't know, then the way to move forward is to really focus on creating adaptive capacity. And through that, or in order to do that, then we need people, particularly on boards, who, yes, they've had experience, yes, they have some skills that are relevant to our strategic position, but I think this idea of natural curiosity really comes to the fore. How do we get board members who aren't constrained by the conventional wisdom around strategy or conventional wisdom around business planning, and are actually really curious enough to enable the organisation to shift to a way of working or a method of operation where adaptive capacity becomes the a strategic advantage for the future, rather than trying to predict and then control for that. We say, how do we operate when the future's unknowable?
Yeah. Now you should, and I don't disagree with any of that. You should never try and predict the future, but you should have an idea of what might, possibly, could, perhaps, maybe, and then start to look at what are some of the big, the future whispers of what could be happening into the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and then putting in place the stuff that makes sense to put in place. Now, a couple of tools for people who are listening to this to take on what Steve and Georgia were saying as well too. Many boards have found that taking one of their board meetings during the year and designating that as a deep dive into one particular strategic issue. So not actually tacking it onto a board meeting, it replaces a board meeting. And that deep dive can then be into, could be artificial intelligence, or it could be, what's happening with data and the changing nature of what that looks like. What's happening in our communities, and where are the expectations going, and what are the implications of that?
Yeah.
And you do a 2 or 3 hour deep dive, possibly facilitated by someone within the staff or from outside, but that is its focus. And then you start to unpick from that. So what are the implications that if we were to put something in place now, is our strategic plan strong enough to be able to deal with that if it were to occur? Or is there something we need to start putting in motion to actually start to understand it a little more?
Yeah, Steve, I'm going to jump in with a couple of questions that are coming through, if that's okay.
Fire away.
One of the questions here is, who leads the strategy? Is it the board or the CEO? That comes up a lot in a lot of discussions.
Yeah, the worst strategic planning group is the board. That's been shown in all sorts of studies. The second worst strategic planning group is the staff. The best strategic planning group is one that is made up of board, senior executives, and some key stakeholders involved in that. Constantly questioning, constantly reviewing, constantly looking to see if we're getting closer to where it is that we wanted to go, but being willing to change when they need to. Now, who owns the strategic plan is the board. The board owns it, but they should not be the ones who are writing it, nor should the staff. So it becomes then an iterative process. I know Steve's got some comments to make in there about adaptive strategy, but your strategic plan should be reviewed at every board meeting, not formally. There should, one of the trips of the trade is to have an agenda item in there that says changes to strategic environment. What are some of these whispers of the future that we're hearing about? I've seen boards where they've actually got a heading at the end of the agenda that says strategic gossip. What have you heard out there, and what do you think the implications for us over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years might be? So it gives permission for these things to occur. And then the reporting is always looking at, well, what are the strategic implications for this going forward? Not just what we need to know now, but what might, if we're doing really well, and we're getting lots of contracts, then what does that mean in 3 years' time? Let's start looking at not just problems, but what do we need to do to be able to gear up? Those sorts of bigger questions.
One of the comments here too is can the phrase strategic plan be the problem, because it's reducing the strategy to planning rather than that bigger picture thinking?
Yeah,
that's probably the terminology.
There's a real issue, I think, in the sort of conventional way of doing strategy, that does turn into a plan, and then Stephen, to your point, turns into a wish list for the future. And time again we see that. So the first point I make is I support the idea boards shouldn't be developing strategy independently. I think the executive is the best place to do that. One of my favorite sayings is strategy is not a democracy. At some point, the commander's intent, or the CEO or board's intent, should be driving that. So I think that's a really good point. In terms of planning, we talk about the activation of strategy, and that's where you're turning strategic intent into a set of tangible actions. And that should certainly not be something that the board is concerned with in any level of detail.
Yeah, not sure I agree with all of that, Mr. McCrone.
Agreeing with me is not a prerequisite for success. So that's
exactly right. Exactly right. One of the things always in planning is there's only 2 things that make a plan, and that is timeframes and outcome measures. So how you do it will change from time to time. Exactly how you do it is how the staff are going. That's their job. But for my point of view is a plan for it to be to actually be strategic. It has to be looking at what is the difference we want to make into the future, and what do we need to start putting in place now. And we do need some timeframes around that, whether they be a 6 month, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years timeframe, whatever it might be. Don't just wait for the end of 3 years to find out whether or not it's been useful. The other thing that makes a plan a proper plan is outcome measures, not measures of activity. So what is the success that we're looking for from this? There are many ways of getting there, but what is non-negotiable is this outcome that we're after. And so therefore, when we're reporting to the board against our strategic plan, it shouldn't be about the activity. It should be within the timeframes, how close are we towards getting the outcomes or the success measures that we're looking for. How we get there is likely to change from time to time.
Absolutely. It's one of the things I often have a discussion with the board is be prescriptive about the outcome, not the way you're going to get it. And if you're really prescriptive about this is what we want to achieve long term, not short term, then you enable the organisation to deliver it. So it's really about changing that focus. If we're prescriptive about the outcome, how you get there, as long as we've got our governance frameworks in place, we've got a risk appetite, we've got policies, we've got codes of conduct, operate within those so that we're managing the risk of execution of strategy. But how you achieve it, be creative, start to explore and push the boundaries of how that's done.
Let's get on to some practical things. Sean, the next slide, if we could. So what we want to do is to make sure that every meeting that we've got, every board meeting is actually a strategic planning meeting. So what that means is that we need to structure our agenda so that those items that are going to have an effect on strategy are right up front. They're not just the ones right at the very end where everyone's exhausted. So what we need to be doing is when we're planning our agenda to actually make sure that those items that we have to crunch, those decision-making items and the discussion items that are focused around these 2 or 3 or 4 really big areas, they take up the majority of the time of the board. There's mechanisms and techniques to deal with the operational stuff, to do with the monitoring stuff. They're easy to do. And if you have a read through the strategic board agenda, that'll take you through the different ways of doing that. But usually, probably about 2/3 of the board meeting right up front should be about the creating the future side of things. What are the big issues? What are the big conversations we need to have? Make sure your vision statement's on every agenda to remind them that we're here to create the vision. We're not here to make sure that the staff are busy. Make sure that the reports are aligned to the strategy. Probably every 3 or 6 months, have an external stakeholder come into your board and ask them what their top 2 strategic issues are and what do they think the implications for your organisation might be. Incredibly powerful. You will thank me if you do this, but once or twice a year, pick up one of your key stakeholders that may or may not be in the same sector as you, but they've got some sort of really powerful strategic relationship with you, and ask them to address the board for 20 minutes on what are their 2 top strategic issues and what do they think the implication for your organisation might be. And then you can look at your strat plan after they've gone and say, is this powerful enough to be able to deal with this if it were to occur? What makes sense for us to do anyway? We just had never thought of it. Same thing with staff presentations. I would twice a year, I'd bring in a staff member who's in charge of a sector, who's in charge of an area. And you would ask them to have a conversation with the board for about 20 minutes about what do they see as the 2 top strategic issues in the next 10 years in their area of responsibility. Now, they'll have to do a bit of research. They'll probably need to be mentored. But this is not about trying to fix it. It's trying to raise our level of awareness from the here and now into what might be into the future and what is relevant for us to look at now that we need to start putting into place. And then I suppose the really big one for me, and then I'll pass over to you, Steve, for your thoughts on this, is we strongly recommend that you do an annual review of your strategic plan. And it's actually a really simple process that we've found. An annual review is you'd have your board and your senior executive together for about 2.5, 3 hours. And literally you take them through, here's our strategy number 1 that we've got. Here's what we think is working. So the staff would lead this. Now, here's what we as staff think is not working. Board, what else do you think isn't working in this? Now, third question you ask, here is what we think we might have missed. Board, do you think, is there anything else that you think we might have missed under this particular strategy? And then based on what's working, what's not working, what have we missed? Here's what we agree to take out of the strat plan because it's either finished or it's no longer relevant, or here's what we agree to put in because we didn't know about this 12 months ago. And then you just run through that process for each of your key strategies. And then the very last question that you have is, okay, so we've got strategy 1 and strategy 2 and strategy 3, and we've had a look at all those things. What are we missing? And that what are we missing is probably the most powerful strategic question that your group can ask. Steve?
Yeah, for me, again, it's less about, I think the process you described is what I would call retrospective coherence. So you can look back in time and see the coherence or otherwise of your strategy. It doesn't necessarily give you foresight through that process. What I would encourage people to do is ask the question, do we really understand our current state in respect to our sense of direction? So in which direction we want hoping to travel? And then ask the question, how do we maximize the potential of our current state, as opposed to saying, what can we do to reach this 5 or 10-year goal? And through that answering of that question, so first thing is that question is always relevant. So it doesn't really matter what's happening in a strategic environment. You want to be sensitive to that and then say, how do we maximize the potential of this situation or this emerging situation or this whisper? I think strategic rumors actually is a very good phrase that I'll probably steal. And then the board's role in that is to say, does the organization have the adaptive capacity to manage through this potential for change? That's the question. Do we have the adaptive capacity? And how do we know that? How do we know that that's the case?
And that's an area that I focus on when looking at current culture of organisations. You can have a fantastic strategy, but if you haven't got the culture of the organisation that's aligned to deliver on that strategy, it's never going to happen. So,
sorry, no, you carry on.
I was just going to jump in with a couple of questions that have come up. If the plan is strategic and focused on those 2 to 3 areas, where do we record the bread and butter outcomes that we continue to do? And I'm going to combine it with another question. How do those success measures integrate with CEO performance measures?
Well, they're all great questions. Can I cover the CEO performance ones? We do a lot of work in this area. And look, in any CEO performance measures, there are always should be 3 types of performance measures. Maximum 7, okay? But 2 or 3 that are around strategy plus some stretch. 1 or 2 that are around behavior or culture that you want the CEO to take carriage of, and then 1 or 2 that are around compliance. These are so important, they just have to get done. So 2 or 3 that are around strategy plus some stretch in there, not just doing the strategic plan. That's why you keep your job. Not just getting the budget, that's why you still got a job. But what's the stretch in there that's really important to the board that will then create even greater value for the communities that we serve? And then 1 or 2 around the behaviour or the culture that the board requires, either from the CEO themselves, so it could be around leadership, it could be around how the staff are being enabled to do their job properly, whatever it might be. And then there's 1 or 2 that are around the compliance side of things. You know, not only do we want to be registered as an aged care provider, but we want to be in the top 5% when it comes to the audit, you know, that sort of thing. So if you keep that in mind, it then makes sure that you don't get into the problem of the KPIs for the CEO are essentially their job description. Look, there's 45 of them. So, and then the other question is, what do you do with the operational reports? Look, most of the board reporting is typically around, here's the activities and here's how we're going against those activities. They should be papers for noting, but they should be looking at leading indicators rather than lagging indicators. Don't tell me what has been in the past. Tell me what we need to know that will give us an indication for the future. And the really good boards are those that have 1 or 2 pages of dashboard reports where the board have agreed these are the key metrics that give us comfort that we have a healthy patient, that the organisation is heading in the right direction, and the Finance Audit Risk Committee go through the details and it's supported by the finances. But these are the key metrics that will tell us that we are doing what it is that we are expecting to do. But they should be papers for noting unless there's a strategic issue that comes from that report that is worthy of board attention. Then you pull it out as a separate discussion paper from, let's say, the CEO's report. There might be something in there that's an emerging issue. Don't hide it in the CEO's report. Pull it out as a separate discussion paper that is worthy of board attention. Otherwise, everything else is a paper for noting. Okay, next one, Sean. Setting the strategic board agenda. We'll send you out an example of what that looks like, but if you take note of some of the stuff in there, it's an absolute game changer when it comes to how we actually structure. If your agenda is made up of present, apology, declarations of interest. Now let's go in excruciating detail through our decisions register. Now, let's also get the reports from our various committees about how busy they've been. Now, let's read through the CEO's report about all the people that he or she has met. Oh, and right at the very end, there's a big issue, but hopefully we'll have enough time to get to it, right? Anyway, have a look at the strategic agenda template that we send out to you. Keep going, Sean. So one of the things that we expect of our directors, and they're not particularly good at it often, is the power of a director, the gift of a director is not what they say. It's not the experience that they espouse at you. It's the questions that they ask that no one else thought of asking. And those questions come from their lived experience. Those questions come from their insight, from their wisdom. The questions come from the technical expertise, and it also comes through their life journey. But what we want to do is we want to make it easier for our directors to ask questions and to help the other directors through the asking of those questions. And so one of the great techniques is always, if you've got a paper for decision or a paper for discussion, have a heading in there that says strategic questions for board consideration, or strategic implications for board discussion, and you highlight those things. And even if you can't think of one as the writer of that report, still have that heading in there because it reminds the directors that that's what they're there for. So what do you do when no one else is strategic? Be this yourself. Don't expect anyone else to do this. Be this yourself. Be that sense of curiosity. Be that person who comes up with some of the best questions. Be that person who reads through the board papers, highlights issues that we want to clarify, make sure that that clarification is issued before the board meeting so we don't spend valuable time trying to go over, what did you mean by that? Or no, we need a bit more information on that. You've got to get all this done beforehand. But you can't expect your fellow directors to be this if you're not willing to be this yourself. It all starts with you. So start looking at what are the questions I should be asking, give some suggestions of how we might actually tighten up in our board reports, work with the chair to help them set the agenda if that rings your bell. Chairs don't necessarily know this stuff. So you might be able to help them, but it starts with you. Okay.
I'll jump in.
Steve, jump in.
So what do we need to write? What do we need in order to ask the right strategic questions? So the answer to that, in my view, is we need a common operating picture. So we need a map of our strategic environment, and in it, our chosen strategic direction. Wardley mapping, if you're not familiar with it, is a good start for that. The other thing we need is really to ask the question, or to map what I call the constraints. What are the things that are enabling us to shift in the direction that we choose, and what are the things that are holding us back? And we might be talking about also boundaries and tensions and connections, which form part of the map. So if a board doesn't have that, then they can ask as many questions as they like, but it's very hard to answer them or table them in a way that makes sense in respect to, is this aligned with our strategy? So that's the first point I'll make. Second point is a constraint might be, Georgia, to your point, culture. If culture is the emergence of interactions over time, then the board can't change the culture, and they can't change time. They can only change the interactions, which is about changing the constraints to allow new interactions to occur. So rather than telling the executive or whoever else the culture that you desire, which is kind of silly if you look at it from that perspective, is you turn around and you say, how do I manage the constraints or change the constraints to allow the emergence of a different culture? It might be something that you're not expecting, might be something new, might be something interesting. If it's good, you amplify it. If it's not, you then disrupt it and change the constraints again. So I think the thing I see that's missing here is this idea of a common operating picture. There you go.
Yeah, I think part of finding out what those constraints are, particularly around culture, it's really hard within an organisation to understand it from within the organisation, from a board perspective, to really get to what are those influencing things around behaviours. And I know this is not a discussion on culture, so I will stop there. Otherwise, I will take over. But it is one of the biggest constraints, because nothing happens in your organisation without people. And being able to identify that and take it forward is to deliver on strategies really important.
I think that in terms of an operating environment, in terms of a strategic map and all that sort, I think there's some great tools enabled to do that out there. But I think the most underutilized tool that we all have, and we just don't use the darn thing, is our vision or our purpose statement.
Agree.
Because what that does is it provides you with the possibilities without limiting you on how to do it. So your vision statement, your purpose statement, there's only two types. There's only two types. There's those that work and those that don't. There's only two types, okay? And the question is, how do you know your vision statement works? And the answer to that is because you use it in everything. You use it shamelessly. You help use it. You use it to help shape your agenda. You use it to help shape discussions. You use it to help shape strategy. So your vision will have 2 or 3 key elements in it. Every director should know what those 2 or 3 key elements are, and none of them should agree on exactly what that looks like.
Yes.
Because the greatest tool that you've got that you can use immediately is once a year, sit down with all your directors and just go through the vision statement and ask, okay, now, Georgia, what does this vision mean to you? These 3 elements in this vision. Now, Steve, what does it mean to you? Now, John, what does this mean to you? And the point there is that it means something slightly different to everyone, and that's why they're sitting around the board table.
Yeah, and I think the important question is, looking forward, having that future view. What is the impact we want to have in the world? That's going to end up being driving your vision. And why is that important? Drives the purpose. So it's asking those really big questions. They are hard questions for a diverse group to answer, but really important to explore and get the words down. Because I agree 100%, Steve. They drive everything in the organisation. They're core to your identity, they're core to your ways of working, the direction, the decision making, even the creation of governance and risk appetites come from that sense of vision and purpose.
Yeah. And then I'll just finish off this conversation on vision, because when should a vision statement change? When you can't use it. When it adds no value to your discussion. Well, how do we know if it adds value? Because you use it constantly.
Yeah,
it's just common sense that is so uncommon. Alrighty, so just a couple of things in there. In terms of board reports, how do we help our directors be more strategic? Please cast a good eye over your board reports and look to see whether or not in your board reports there is a heading that says, here are the strategic implications. Financial reports are the worst here, all right? Don't tell me about what the variance is. Tell me about the strategic implications of this variance. What is it going to mean in 2 years or 5 years? What are those implications going forward? What questions should we be asking that these variances or the ratios within our balance sheet are telling us? Every board report has to answer 2 questions. The first question is, so what? So what do you want me to do with this? And if you can't tell me a so what, then why are you wasting my time with this? So come up with a so what. And then my absolute favourite is, where's Wally? Don't make me search for Wally. For those of you who are international, just do a Google search on where's Wally, and then you'll chuckle when you see what it's all about. But don't make me search through the board report to find out where Wally is. Bring it right up front. Put a big circle around it. Where's Wally in all of this? So let's just finish this up. This session that we wanted to do today as a panel was just to explore what does it mean to help our directors be more strategic. And there's ways we can do it through structuring the agenda, structuring our reports, but really it boils down to who do you choose to be? Are you willing to be strategic? Are you willing to be that sense of curiosity? Are you willing to look at the different ways that we could do it? What are these whispers of the future? Then you can bring into play the tools, and your strat plan is only a tool. So, Sean, over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Great discussion. Please feel free to connect with Stephen McCrone or Georgia on LinkedIn. I'm sure they'll appreciate your connection there. As Steve mentioned, you'll receive an email from us pretty shortly, tomorrow morning actually, which will include a copy of today's webinar, the slides, the white paper from Brendan Walsh and Stephen Bowman, and also the strategic agenda template, which I think you'll get great value from. So now, as you just leave the webinar, don't forget to complete our 1-minute survey. Go in the draw to win our hamper. We'll announce the winner tomorrow as well. Thanks again, everybody, for your attendance. I really appreciate the time you've put aside to attend our live event. I hope you enjoyed the discussion today. Thank you, Stephen, Steve, and Georgia for your contribution. And everybody, I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.